Okay, so have you ever wished that you could just like snap your fingers and know a new language?
Oh, yeah. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Well, this program, English Unlocked, it says that you can become fluent in English in just 30 days. And it makes me wonder, is that even possible?
Well, it is a pretty ambitious goal, but their approach is kind of fascinating
Yeah.
because they completely ditch the traditional grammar-first method
Oh.
and just kind of throw you right into the deep end of, like, speaking English.
So, like, forget all the rules and just start talking.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I'm curious, how do they actually pull that off?
So they highlight what they call essential words and phrases
Yeah.
as the foundation for everything. It's like they're giving you just the bare minimum to start forming basic sentences right from the beginning.
So like they're just giving you the essential tools you need to start building something, even if like, it's not perfect at first.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Okay.
They focus on like high frequency verbs like to be, to have, to
Mm.
do, and basic pronouns like I, you, he, it.
Right.
And then just simple question words like what, where, when, why.
Okay, so I mean, that doesn't really sound like a lot.
Right, you might be thinking, well, how far can you really get with just that?
Yeah.
But the key is in how they combine these elements.
Oh, okay, I see. So even with just like a handful of these kind of like building blocks,
Mm.
you can start creating simple phrases and questions right away.
Exactly.
And I imagine that can be really empowering for someone who is like brand new to the language.
Oh, absolutely. Because instead of getting bogged down in all the grammar rules,
Yeah.
you're immediately experiencing the thrill of actually communicating,
Yeah.
even if it's just at a basic level.
Yeah.
And that's where the psychology of their approach, I think, is really interesting.
Okay.
By building your confidence and comfort early on, they aim to like really reduce the fear of making mistakes,
Oh, I see.
which is often a huge barrier for language learners.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes me think about those like immersion schools where, you're just forbidden from speaking your native language and you're just forced to communicate, even if, you know, you're stumbling over your words at first.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. And it seems to work, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, think about how children learn their first language.
Right.
They don't start with grammar textbooks.
Yeah.
They learn by just imitating and experimenting and getting
Mhm.
constant feedback from
Yeah.
their environment.
So they've got you speaking from day one with these like essential phrases.
Right.
But how do they help you progress beyond that?
Well, they mention a step-by-step speaking plan,
Okay.
and that's where the program gets really interesting.
Right.
Think of it as like a structured roadmap that guides you
Yeah.
from those basic phrases to increasingly complex sentences and structures.
Uh-huh.
But what really sets it apart is the emphasis on role-playing and real-world scenarios.
Oh, so instead of like just memorizing verb conjugations, from a book, you're actually practicing how to order food at a restaurant or like ask for directions.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's about taking those core elements that you've learned and applying them to practical situations you might encounter in real life.
Yeah, I have to admit that does sound more engaging than just like drilling vocabulary lists
Yeah.
or working through grammar exercises.
Yeah, it is. It's about creating a more immersive and interactive learning experience.
Right. So instead of just learning about the language, you're actually learning by doing it,
That's it.
which is ultimately how we master any skill, right?
Right.
It's like the difference between reading a cookbook and actually cooking a meal.
Yeah.
You can study all the techniques and ingredients, but
Yeah.
until you actually get your hands dirty and start experimenting,
Right.
you never really develop your culinary skills.
Exactly. And I think this program is all about getting you into the kitchen of language learning as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not it can actually lead to fluency in 30 days, well, that's debatable.
Uh-huh.
But I think the approach itself raises some intriguing questions about how we approach language learning in general.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it really makes you wonder if we've been like overcomplicating language learning all these years.
Right.
I mean, think about it. Like, we spend years in school memorizing grammar rules and vocabulary lists, but how many of us can actually hold conversation in another language after all of that?
That's a great point. And there's actually like a growing body of research that supports this idea of immersion-based learning.
Hmm.
Studies have shown that learners who are exposed to a language in like a more natural
Yeah,
communicative setting
right.
tend to develop fluency faster than those who focus primarily on grammar and like rote memorization.
So it's not just about learning the rules,
Right.
it's about actually using the language in a meaningful way.
Exactly. And that's where these real world scenarios in English Unlocked really come into play. by simulating real-life situations.
Yeah.
The program aims to make the learning process more relevant and engaging,
Uh-huh.
which in turn can lead to better retention and faster progress.
It sounds like they're really tapping into the power of context
Yeah.
because when you're like learning vocabulary or grammar in isolation, it's really easy to forget it.
Right.
But when you're using that same language to like order a coffee or ask for directions,
Yeah.
it suddenly becomes so much more memorable
Right.
because it's like tied to a real experience.
Exactly. And, that actually connects to another interesting aspect of this program,
Okay.
which is the emphasis on building confidence from the very beginning
Yeah.
by encouraging learners to speak right away,
Uh-huh.
even if they make mistakes.
Yeah.
It helps them develop a more positive attitude towards learning the language.
I can definitely see how that would be crucial.
Right.
I mean, I've known so many people who just give up on learning a language because they get so discouraged by their early mistakes.
Mm.
They're so afraid of sounding foolish that they
Yeah.
just avoid speaking altogether.
That's a really common trap.
Yeah.
And it's one that this program seems to be actively trying to avoid.
Right.
It's like they're
Well,
saying, embrace the mistakes.
Yeah.
They're part of the process.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful message because it shifts the focus from perfection to progress.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about being flawless.
Yeah.
It's about making an effort to communicate
Right.
and gradually improving over time.
So it's about fostering a growth mindset
Yes,
rather than a fixed mindset when it comes to language learning.
exactly. And that can make all the difference.
Yeah.
Now, of course, English Unlocked isn't the only program that uses these principles.
Right.
There are a lot of other immersion-based language learning methods out there,
Sure.
some of which have been around for decades.
That's true. Yeah. I've heard of those programs where you like live with a host family in a foreign country
Right.
and are just completely immersed in the language and culture.
Right. And those can be incredibly effective,
Yeah.
although they're obviously not feasible for everyone.
Right. Yeah.
So what's interesting about English Unlocked is that it attempts to recreate some of those immersion elements
Yeah.
within a more accessible format.
So it's like a condensed version
Right.
of a full-blown immersion experience.
Exactly.
But that brings up another question.
Yeah.
Can you really achieve fluency in just 30 days, even with the most effective methods?
That's where things get a little bit more nuanced
Okay.
because fluency is kind of a complex concept
Yeah.
and it's hard to define precisely.
Right.
I mean, some people might consider fluency to be like the ability to hold a basic conversation,
Right.
while others might define it as near native proficiency.
Yeah, I guess it depends on like your goals
Yeah.
and your expectations.
Exactly. And it also depends on factors like your prior language learning experience,
Mm-hmm.
your aptitude for languages,
Right.
and the amount of time and effort you're willing to put in.
So while English Unlocked might not like magically transform you into a fluent English speaker in 30 days,
Yeah.
it could certainly provide you with like a solid foundation
Right.
and accelerate your progress.
Yeah, I think it could be particularly beneficial for beginners who are feeling overwhelmed
Yeah,
by the more traditional language learning methods.
by just like the thought of starting.
Right.
Yeah.
By focusing on practical communication
Yeah.
and building confidence early on,
Right.
it could help learners overcome those initial hurdles
Yeah.
and develop a more positive relationship with the language.
As we're discussing this, I can't help but wonder if these principles could be applied to other skills beyond language learning.
That's a fascinating thought.
Yeah.
Could we unlock other skills like playing an instrument or coding
Yeah.
using a similar approach?
What if instead of starting with all the theory and like technicalities,
Right.
we jumped right into creating something tangible, even if it's just like a simple song?
For a basic program.
It's an intriguing idea.
Yeah.
Imagine learning a few chords on the guitar and just strumming a simple song on day one.
Yeah.
That sense of accomplishment could be incredibly motivating, don't you think?
It would definitely be more engaging than spending weeks studying music theory
Yeah.
before even touching an instrument.
Right. And it aligns with what we were saying about the importance of confidence and early success
Right.
in the learning process.
Yeah.
It's all about finding those core elements, like the building blocks of the skill,
Yeah.
and then using them to create something meaningful right away. And those early wins can really fuel your motivation and keep you engaged even when the learning gets tougher.
Yeah, it's like giving yourself permission to just be a beginner again
Right.
and not be afraid to experiment
Right.
and make those inevitable early mistakes.
Yeah, and that's such a crucial point.
Yeah.
So often we let the fear of failure just hold us back.
From trying new things or pursuing our passions.
Yeah.
But when we embrace those early stages of learning,
Yeah.
those messy stages,
Yeah.
we really open ourselves up to new possibilities
Right.
and actually accelerate our progress.
Yeah, it reminds me of that quote, "The master has failed more times than the beginner has even tried."
Exactly. And I think that applies to so many areas of life,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
not just language learning,
Yeah.
whether you're trying to learn a new skill
Uh-huh.
or start a business or just like even step outside of your comfort zone.
Right.
Embracing those early stumbles is just essential for growth.
This has been a really insightful deep dive.
It has.
So to recap what we've learned from English Unlocked,
Yeah.
their approach is all about speaking from day one,
Uh-huh.
building a foundation with those essential words and phrases,
Right.
and then following a structured plan with lots of real-world practice.
Yeah. It's a refreshing take on language learning.
Yeah.
And it really challenges that traditional grammar-first approach.
Uh-huh.
It also highlights the importance of psychology
Right.
in the learning process,
Yeah.
like building confidence, reducing the fear of failure,
Right.
and tapping into intrinsic motivation.
It makes you wonder if we could be applying these principles more broadly,
Yeah.
like in education,
Yeah,
and just beyond.
for sure.
Maybe we need to rethink how we approach learning in general
Right.
and focus more on creating those immersive, engaging experiences
Yeah,
that encourage experimentation and celebrate progress over perfection.
absolutely. So here's a thought-provoking question for you to ponder as we wrap up.
Okay.
What skill have you always wanted to learn but felt intimidated by? Could you unlock it by applying these principles of immersion, core elements, and practical application?
Maybe it's time to ditch the rule book, jump in the deep end, and see what happens.
Oh, I love it.
All right, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.